So say two students resolve an issue, but like the teachers or the students' parents come back around and they say that you've been too soft or they're not happy with the outcome. What would you say to that?
Again, something that comes up. I'm thinking of one school in particular where the principal is extremely restorative. He loves the questions, the process, the fairness. But he'll say to me that some of his teachers are if you like, on his case. And again, as you mentioned, sometimes parents, someone from the outside is looking at, what do you mean he or she said that? And all it was a conversation and a sorry. So the thing there is definitely this idea of before anything like that happens, at the beginning, you're explaining to teachers, you're explaining to students, and you're explaining to parents. I mean, they're the three big stakeholders, if you like, in any school. Look, we've spoken about it, we've agreed, we are going to be a restorative school. This is how we're going to work. We're not necessarily going to go down the route of punishment, etc. When something happens, as a school, our ethos, our approach is to sit people down, find out the story, what happened, who was harmed. We believe in acknowledging harm and, holding people accountable and getting people to come up with, some solution, some strategy. So that's explained to parents, and that might take a lot of explaining, because parents, yourself, you're probably the same generation as me. We went to school, and I can still remember getting slaps on the hand from a ruler. And the old style, if you like, was punishment. So if you're a parent and you're used to that, you haven't been to school in 30 years, you're expecting that style of approach. So
your school only had rulers. Luxury, absolute luxury. We were a hurling school when I was going to school. That was a different approach.
Okay, there was a meter stick as well. I remember the meter stick getting broken off someone.
Yeah, and plus having to walk 60 miles in the snow, bare feet, with all that stuff.
You are older than me.
It has definitely changed the approach since we were going.
So the teachers are probably much, they're much more in tune. The students are probably much more in tune. So there's a piece of work then to be done with parents, and educating parents, because otherwise it's not fair. It's not fair that they don't know about this thing. So I mean, just to touch on fair process, which is another cornerstone of restorative practice. The 3 E's: engage, just let everybody know the way you're working. Explanation, why we're doing this, and expectation, clarity. So the parents, so if they do hear Johnny and Mary have had an argument, they've sat down, it's been resolved, someone has apologized to someone else, that's the parents could reasonably expect that type of an outcome. So fair process is a huge part, and just again educating people in advance rather than setting themselves up for some sort of surprise or shock down the road.